Welcome. We're here with part 2 of our Getting to Know Christina Scheppelmann and learning about the job of a general director. I'm Jonathan Dean. I'm Seattle Opera dramaturg, and Christina Scheppelmann, our general director and my boss as of the last 7 months, I think we said.
Yes.
And we had sort of taken you through your life in opera up to the point when you first came to the U.S. You've been Seattle is actually the 3rd U.S. opera company that you have run.
That I'm working at, not run. Let's not exaggerate, because I was
administrated.
Yeah,
Shall we
I mean,
say?
I was artistic administrator at San Francisco Opera, director of artistic administration at Washington D.C. at Washington National Opera, and then from there I went to the Middle East. Best time of my life. Loved it.
This must have been a bit of a shock to the system after coming from, say, Milan, where the theater tradition goes back, or Hamburg, which as I understand got opera like well before 1700. They were doing opera in Hamburg.
Actually, one of the early directors of the Hamburg Opera was Telemann. And so, I mean, of course, his history in Europe is way longer, but there's no shock to the system because everything changes, everything goes through evolutions, and just because an opera house or an opera as such has been in the city for a very long time doesn't mean anything. You know, times change, people change, audiences change, and I always say to people, the only constant in life is change. So just because a Telemann was in Hamburg at some point, it doesn't say anything about the Hamburg Opera today. There's a tradition, of course, but and you should be aware of those traditions when you run a particular opera house. But today is today, and that's where you are. And as a general director, I always say, because you asked me, what does it take? Jack of all trades, master of none, because you have to know a little bit about absolutely everything in order to make decisions for your opera company.
Now, with Lotfi and Mansouri in San Francisco Opera, you guys did some pretty extraordinary pieces while you were there. It occurs to me
it was fun.
You did a lot of Russian operas.
Yeah.
You and I were talking when we did Eugene Onegin earlier this year about all the shows that I wish that we had done in Seattle, but you guys actually pulled them off.
Well, Lotfi actually had created a connection with Valery Gergiev, and so Valery made his debut in the U.S. at San Francisco in 91, 92. I think in 93 with War and Peace. And then he came for
shortly after the sort of thawing and the glasnost and that whole era that these artists were able to come here for the first time.
Yeah. And then Valery came for several years in a row. We did Russell and Ludmila, first in St. Petersburg, then in San Francisco. We did Betrothal in the Monastery, Fiery Angel. We did several Russian titles in San Francisco. And also Anna Netrebko made her international debut outside of St. Petersburg in San Francisco. She was 23. I remember she was 22, while Valery was conducting Russell and Ludmila. She came to audition for us in San Francisco. And then, I'm sorry. She actually auditioned for Russell and Ludmila. Valery was at that time in San Francisco. She auditioned for us. She was 22. And then we hired her for the following season to sing Ludmila and Russell and Ludmila. And that was her international debut. And then she sang several times in San Francisco.
There was a staff member when you were there at San Francisco Opera, Jake Heggie, who I think was a PR guy at one point, wasn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, he was working actually Jake was a great friend just from the get-go because we're similar age. And so when I came to San Francisco, he from the beginning was a great friend together with Elena Park, who then also worked in the press department at San Francisco Opera. And they both became really good friends and helpful friends. And then we commissioned Dead Man Walking. Lotfi commissioned Dead Man Walking to Jake. And that's when he became a full-time composer. But while he worked at the press department, he already had written a lot of songs for piano and voice, obviously, for some of the Merolini and some of the Adler Fellows. He written some
younger singers who were there who were ready to do new music.
Yeah, no, and they also enjoyed working with somebody that really wanted to write for the voice. He became early on friends with Federica von Stade, so he worked songs for her. He worked with Nicole Foland and several others of the Adler Fellows, Jenny Larmore, Joyce Di Donato. I mean, Jake had very early really good contact with a lot of those singers, and learned about the voice by writing for the voice, for piano and voice. You have to know the voice before you write for it. You know, composers learn a lot about instruments at the conservatory, but the instrument voice is extremely complex and difficult. I think it's the most complex instrument that a composer can write for. And Jake really understood and wanted to understand the voice and loves the voice.
Mm-hmm. Christina, take us, if you will, to the other side now of the United States. You were with San Francisco Opera for a lot of really, really, really great years, and then switched over here to the Kennedy Center. Tell me about one. This was a Seattle Opera rental or exchange. Maybe it was a co-production. And what I heard, this is the Chris Alexander Ariadne of Naxos, which we started here in 2004 and it won the Artist of the Year award. It had a whole lot of supers on stage for the party in the second part. And the story that I heard was that when it played at Kennedy Center, you had a very, very special opera fan in there.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's the place.
There we go. That's the place. We had actually for the second time in that opera, Justice Ginsburg was a super in Ariadne of Naxos. She also was a super in Constitution Hall when we did Fledermaus. In the second act, when the guests come in at Orlovsky's ball, they were announced by Ivan as the three supremes. Justice Ginsburg, Justice Breyer, Justice Kennedy came in their justice robes out and joined Orlovsky's party. It was really fun. And Justice Ginsburg is an amazing opera fan. She actually has in her chambers, she has a page of Moby Dick by Jake Hagee, signed by Jake Hagee, dedicated to her. She's a huge opera fan, and it's just wonderful to see her enthusiasm, to see this absolutely brilliant mind, fantastic judge, opinionated, based on great knowledge and great intelligence, and have this genuine, wonderful enthusiasm for opera. It's been really wonderful to get to know her a little bit over those years.
Mm-hmm. Your next sort of governmental employer on the other side of the world, how do we get from the heart of America, and even in the chambers where America is ironed out by people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, to this rather fantastic location here, the Royal Opera Muscat?
And I was the first general director living in, actually was called there Director General. And I was the first director general in place, living in Muscat and running the opera house there. It was phenomenal. I mean, look at that. It's gorgeous. It's absolutely wonderful. It's not
exactly the same as a lot of these opera houses that you've been in America and Europe, in terms of we're putting on kind of the standard opera rep with our resident company. Tell us a little bit about how this theater operated.
Well, you know, you can't be naive. You know, this is a performing arts center. Just because you build the building doesn't mean you have the culture all of a sudden. You're in a different place. You're in a different part of the world. You're in a Muslim country with a different musical history, also with a different culture. And this is a performing arts center. And also this theater is opera house and theater with a pit, as much as it also transforms itself into a concert hall. It has a concert shell with an integrated organ with 4,200 pipes. And there's this huge concert shell, so it's 3 walls and a ceiling, that lives upstage. And then during performances where you need the grid and you need the pit, and then you lay a parquet floor, then on double tracks, this whole concert shell moves forward and connects seamlessly with the auditorium, and the whole thing becomes a concert hall. Oh. And 30%, 35% of the programming is Arabic music, stars of the Arab countries, of the various Arab countries. I mean, really from Central Asia to Morocco.
Wow.
Because I mean, that's their culture. Just because we don't know about those artists doesn't mean there aren't fantastic, excellent, and big stars. I mean, we always mix up those things. Oh, if I don't know it, if in our wonderful, entitled Occidental world we don't know about it, then it can't be any good. And you gotta get over that, you know. I mean, the world is big. There are fantastic artists, musicians, and wonderful assets in all parts of the world. And there are stars, great stars in all the Arab countries. And I was fortunate to be able to get to know them through my work. But it was a fantastic experience. And so 35% more or less was Arabic music and groups and singers from the Arab countries. And then we had about 5 to 6 operas. That was all imported, of course. I mean, singers, orchestra, chorus, everybody was brought in for 2 or 3 performances.
So in that case, you would connect with another, like a Seattle Opera or Hamburg, or what were the theaters that you?
But it's like a tour. It's like all the tours since the 70s when opera companies went to Japan, for example. I mean, the Met has been going to Tokyo for many years. You know, you take everybody and you bring them there. And so you import the whole group. They have to be pre-rehearsed, so it has to be production that they have in repertoire with singers who've done the production already, because they only have about 5 days in Oman before they then perform the production. But, you know, it's doable. I also brought the Vienna State Opera to Muscat, and a Viennese journalist asked me, "Oh, so what are you going to teach them here?" And I kind of looked at him kind of in anger, but also a little bit kind of in disbelief. And I said, "I'm not here to teach them anything. I'm here to learn their culture so that I can then apply my experience within this culture." This is such a kind of arrogance, really, of the Western world. So, oh, what are we going to teach them?
Teaching, yeah, it sort of implies a one-way, the teacher over here and the learner over here, as opposed to
really colonial attitude. And, you know, we unfortunately, when we don't know something, we think it's bad, and we think we have to change other people to the way we know to do things. I loved being in different places. I loved experiencing a different culture, and I wasn't there to change them at all. I was there to live that other culture, to really learn. I loved it. And as I said, I go still back every year. And I have friends there. I left a lot of friends there. And it's a joy for me to go back and step off the plane and feel this warm, smooth air of that part of the world, and sit at a cafe that I love. It's called Candle Cafe. It's right on the beach, and you can hear the water. You can smoke a shisha pipe and drink your lemon mint juice, and it's really enjoyable to me.
It sounds also like a place where there is a future, where everything is oriented towards we're growing, we're building, we're all working together. And I wonder, I mean, that must be something, all the different places you've worked, some of them, particularly these opera companies that have really, really legendary pasts, we get a little bit backward looking sometimes.
Yeah. That is really true. I think Europe, I mean, depending what sector you're talking about, because in many sectors, we always look to the future. I mean, high tech is a business and a sector that looks constantly to the future. And there are other sectors who tend to look a little bit backwards. But I think you need to do both. And I mean, with all I said, I mean, Oman is not perfect. No place is perfect. But it kind of, being such a young country as part of the modern world, is really interesting, as you say, to see how they look at the future. There's still a lot of things that need to be done, and things, they have development to do, but we all have development to do. Every country has to go through development. And since you just changed the background to Barcelona, where I worked,
prodding you,
where I worked twice.
Once in your 20s, once later on.
Exactly, there we are. And
Again, no,
even there,
this is the new building. This photo is not the one. This is not the one that burnt down on your
well,
first parcel.
the facade didn't burn.
Oh
The
no.
facade didn't burn down. It's what is behind that was completely rebuilt. I mean, luckily the facade didn't burn down. That's the one thing that stayed, but everything else, you can actually find, if you Google it, you can find pictures from the fire from when the theater was burning, and it's pretty dramatic. But even there, for example, I worked in the old house. It burned down, and then I worked there again, and now recently for nearly 5 years before coming to Seattle. But for example, they rebuilt the house, the auditorium, to look exactly like the 19th century auditorium. And personally,
get back to our glory days.
Yeah, I mean, but and some people in Barcelona will hate me for saying this, but I think it was a mistake. That horseshoe shape that has basically about 400 seats where you cannot see anything. They're just seats that, because of the 19th century concept of horseshoe shape, where you went to see and be seen and not to really look at the stage. I think the auditorium could have been built more for the audience of the 21st century. We want to see what's on the stage. And so that's that much about, or maybe that's already too much about looking backwards instead of forward. But there it is. It's a fantastic
it's experience that you bring with, of course, as we go into what I think, I mean, our theater's from 2003. I mean, maybe I'm just used to it, but I think it's a pretty comfortable and delightful place to go and enjoy.
Yeah, McCaw Hall is a fantastic theater. It doesn't feel as big as it is. I mean, it has about 2,800 plus seats. But when you're in the auditorium, even all the way up, or when you're on the stage and look into the hall, it doesn't feel that big. You hear the number and you expect this huge, vast space. And it actually is a really very sizable theater. It feels compact, and the acoustics are fantastic. And also, not just because I say it, or the fans of McCaw Hall, the Seattleites say it, but also the singers generally say that.
We have a beautiful theater. It's very sad to walk by there nowadays, because of course it's all closed up and will be until we can be safe and healthy for everybody in the audience in there. But we will be back. Christina Scheppelmann, we've run out of time once again. I imagine that we could probably keep going, and maybe we will. But thanks for sharing with us some of your extraordinary journey, and we'll be with you for the next step.
Thank you, everybody. Stay healthy, and we will be back. Just hold on, and I'll see you again. And thank you for listening in. Thanks, Jonathan.